Welcome back to part 7 of Trump, the Magnificence of America. Nobody's a picture perfect. Here on the Oliver Lynn channel. This here is a picture of Francis Folsom Cleveland. We now continue we continue with incredible comparisons between Donald Trump and Grover Cleveland. Please continue to research these two incredible figures. Mr. Trump continues to say and do things that link him to his historical twin, Grover Cleveland. We start in a different place than usual. In a 2006 interview on The View, Mr. Trump was on the show with his daughter Ivanka. He made a statement in jest and comedy, I might say, but of course the media does its best to sexually pervert anything it can. This video can be found on YouTube. Mr. Trump stated in referring to Ivanka, his daughter, "Although she does have a very nice figure, I've said that if Ivanka weren't my daughter, perhaps I would be dating her." He then went on to say, "Is that terrible?" I say, no, what father wouldn't pass up the opportunity to poke fun at one of their kids after all they put us through? Sure, it was different. Some articles that covered it tried to figure out why he said it. I think he had to say it. In doing so, he linked himself to Grover Cleveland. And here's how. Grover Cleveland's best friend and law partner in Buffalo was Oscar Folsom, Francis Folsom's father. It was shortly after Francis was born that Mr. Cleveland met his future wife. Mr. Cleveland even bought her a baby carriage and was very fond of her growing up. Mr. Folsom died in a carriage accident when Francis was 11 years old. Since Mr. Folsom had no will, the court appointed Mr. Grover Cleveland as the administrator of his estate. This brought him even closer to Francis. Some historical sites say that Mr. Cleveland took on the role of Francis's guardian. Others object. Anyway, Mr. Cleveland made a quote either to Mr. Folsom when he was alive or to the mothers of many women whom sought out the bachelor Mr. Cleveland to wed their daughters, or to both. The historical accounts differ. But Mr. Cleveland replied coyly, "I've been waiting for my wife to grow up." Although Mr. Trump spoke of Ivanka in jest, of possibly dating her if she wasn't his daughter, Mr. Cleveland actually married a wife that, as you can see, was as close to being a daughter as one could be, but actually not related. There is no historical accounts of any improper relationship between Mr. Cleveland and Francis at any time prior to them falling in love and marrying when she was 21 and he was 49 years old. But Mr. Cleveland did have a sex scandal, as we've already looked at, and had the reputation of being a ladies' man prior to marrying Francis. They say love knows no bounds. Was that the attraction of the 2 and 4 program of Francis and Mr. Cleveland, or strange as it may seem, love at first sight? I will explain love at first sight in the next video, the next book I state here, but I'm just going to do videos. It transcends dimensions between two ageless spirits. Let's get back to our comparisons of Donald Trump and Grover Cleveland. Grover Cleveland was born in New Jersey and moved to New York as a young child. Donald Trump was born in New York City and still lives there. Grover Cleveland was a Presbyterian. Donald Trump is a Presbyterian. It was said by many that Grover Cleveland was arrogant. It is said by many that Donald Trump is arrogant. Grover Cleveland was said to have been a ladies' man. Donald Trump has been called a ladies' man. Before we continue our similarities and polarities, let's get a little overall historical information on these two men. Mr. Cleveland won 3 consecutive majority votes for president, 1884, 1888, 1892, but lost the Electoral College in 1888, making him the only president in U.S. history to serve non-consecutive terms. He was the 22nd and 24th President of the United States. In 1871, Mr. Cleveland's first political office was Sheriff of Buffalo, New York. In 1873, he went back to his law practice. He passed the law exam without even attending college. He ran for mayor of Buffalo in 1881 and assumed office in 1882. By January of 1883, he became governor of New York. In 1884, he was nominated for president by the Democratic Party. Grover Cleveland was a bourbon Democrat. This was before Democrats were associated with socialism. The Bourbon Democrats believed in states' rights, individual liberties, and many things that are associated with Republicans such as Mr. Ron Paul, who is not a member of this country's uniparty, and said Grover Cleveland is one of his heroes. The Bourbon Democrats became extinct as a party over 100 years ago. Throughout Mr. Trump's life, he built his empire. He started out as a Democrat, then Republican, then Reform Party, then Democrat, then Republican, then Independent, and now Republican. I truly believe, as I'm sure you are possibly thinking, Mr. Trump is searching for a party that has been extinct for over 100 years. Maybe Mr. Trump should start his own party, the Bourbon Republicans. Then he will feel at home. It can be known as the anti-establishment wing of the Republican Party. Now back to our comparisons. These are two polarities or opposites between the two men. Grover Cleveland was a Bourbon Democrat. Donald Trump is a Republican, although he has been a Democrat. Grover Cleveland sought to lower tariffs because they were too high. Donald Trump seeks to raise tariffs because they are so low or non-existent. Back to our similarities now. Grover Cleveland ran as a reformer of corrupt government. Donald Trump is running as a reformer of corrupt establishment government that is totally entrenched in this day and age. Grover Cleveland earned much of his popularity because he was an outsider and not part of the corrupt Washington, D.C. politics. Donald Trump earned much of his popularity due to his outsider status and not being a part of the corrupt Washington, D.C. establishment. Grover Cleveland opposed unnecessary government spending. Donald Trump opposes unnecessary government spending. Grover Cleveland was popular with the voters and made enemies in his own party. Donald Trump is popular with the voters and has made many enemies in his own party. Grover Cleveland spoke extemporaneously. Donald Trump speaks extemporaneously. Grover Cleveland, when the Conscription Act was passed in 1863, paid a Polish immigrant to take his place in the Civil War. He was attacked by his own party for this, but it was completely legal. Donald Trump used his college years to obtain deferments, and once that he had graduated, received a medical disqualification for bone spurs in his foot. He did not serve in the Vietnam War because of this. He is attacked by his own party for not serving in the Vietnam War, but this was completely legal. Grover Cleveland hired that Polish immigrant to take his place in the Civil War. Donald Trump hired a contractor to work for him. The contractor had Polish immigrants on his crew. Mr. Trump didn't know about the Polish immigrants, but got in trouble for it anyway. Even when Mr. Trump isn't directly involved in history, he's still involved in history. Grover Cleveland was pro-business. Donald Trump is pro-business. Grover Cleveland was anti-imperialism and shunned foreign entanglements. Donald Trump is nominated for the 2016 Nobel Peace Prize for Peace Through Strength. Mr. Trump wants a military large enough that no country or group will want war with the United States. Grover Cleveland, when Venezuela requested mediation over a border dispute with British Guiana due to England laying claim to the Orinoco River, sent warships to South America and threatened war with England to compel the British to accept mediation. The British backed down and did accept mediation. Excuse me. Donald Trump, in January of 2016, England threatened to declare war on Mr. Trump when 600,000 signatures on petitions were presented to British Parliament seeking to ban Mr. Trump from England because of his proposed Muslim ban in the United States. British Parliament backed down, just like in Grover Cleveland's day. Grover Cleveland appealed to the mugwumps, a reform-minded independent wing of the Republican Party. They crossed party lines and gave Cleveland the presidential victory. Donald Trump appeals to Democrats and independents in open primaries and is projected to pull as many as 20% of Democrats in the general election. Grover Cleveland disliked the media so much that they weren't allowed in the White House. Donald Trump dislikes the media because of their lies and is constantly defending himself from them. Grover Cleveland in 1895 was the first president to be filmed in a moving picture as he signed a bill into law. Donald Trump is a reality TV star. Grover Cleveland defended traditional marriage. Donald Trump supports traditional marriage. Grover Cleveland's last words before he died was, "I have tried so hard to do right." Donald Trump always does his best and always tries to do what is right. Grover Cleveland, in response to the Islamic massacres in Diyarbakir between the years 1894 and 1896, in which 25,000 Christians were murdered, stated on December 2, 1895, "Massacres of Christians in Armenia and the development there of a spirit of fanatic hostility to Christian influences naturally excited apprehension. European powers have assumed a duty as agents of the Christian world to enforce such conduct of Turkish government as will refrain fanatical brutality, as have shocked civilization." On December 7, 1896, Grover Cleveland quoted again on these massacres, "Mad bigotry and cruel fanaticism, wanton destruction of homes, and the bloody butchery of men, women, and children made martyrs to their profession of Christian faith. Our citizens in Turkey, in the midst of dreadful scenes of danger, their safety is by no means assured. The outbreaks of blind fury which lead to murder and pillage in Turkey occur suddenly and without notice. I do not believe the present somber prospect in Turkey will be long permitted to offend the sight of Christendom. It seems hardly possible that the earnest demand of good people throughout the Christian world for its corrective treatment will remain unanswered. Donald Trump wants to ban Islamic travel to the United States. Everything Mr. Trump says about Islam is true. As you see above, some things never change. And besides, I guess you could say Mr. Trump has some inside information. Is that correct, Mr. Cleveland?" Grover Cleveland idolized Andrew Jackson. Donald Trump has had several historians compare his rise to that of Andrew Jackson. University of Illinois Chicago Pavilion, where to date was the only rally of Mr. Trump's to be canceled due to violence, when large crowds of what was described as anarchists by the media converged on the event, violence broke out and the event was canceled. Out of any place in the country to have violence break out, an event of Mr. Trump's canceled, why was it here? The University of Illinois Chicago Pavilion is 2.4 miles from where James G. Blaine was nominated for the Republican ticket and was a bitter foe of Grover Cleveland. Many historians cite this 1884 election as one of the most vicious in presidential history. It is also only 1.9 miles from where James G. Blaine's polarity, Hillary Clinton, was born. In an ABC article I read a while ago, a man that was arrested at a Donald Trump rally said he was paid $3,500 to basically protest and be arrested. He said he was trained in classes on what to do at the rally. He wasn't positive which candidate was responsible for those classes, but thought it was Hillary Clinton's camp. I'm sure it will never be proven to be true or not, but I just laughed as I read it and thought, Grover Cleveland and James G. Blaine are at it again. One final tie-in to the 1884 election and the 2016 election, and the iconic historic figure that Donald Trump represents. Moses Cleveland is the founder of Cleveland, Ohio. The A was dropped from his name, and Cleveland is the spelling which stuck, Cleveland. President Grover Cleveland was a distant relative of Moses Cleveland that founded Cleveland, Ohio. Now you understand why there is no other place on the face of this planet that could have been chosen for the 2016 Republican National Convention. It absolutely had to be Cleveland, Ohio. Because metaphorically speaking, of course, from the pages of history walks the greatness of President Grover Cleveland and his beautiful wife, Frances Folsom Cleveland, in the visage of Donald Trump and wife Melania Trump. Welcome back. America has been waiting for more than 120 years. The speeches above by Grover Cleveland on the Diyarbakir massacres were carried by FreedomOutpost.com and StateOfTheUnionHistory.com. All comparisons of every historical figure were derived from RobinsonLibrary.com, MillerCenter.org, Wikipedia.org, TheWhiteHouse.gov. Now, Chapter 13, Recap of the 1884 election. The 1884 election is often recounted as one of the most vicious in history. That is exactly what we see today. If it wasn't for the modern conveniences of today and the sports many enjoy, many of which originated in the Gilded Age we just covered, many would think they were still living in 1884. The names and faces have changed, but the programs are the same, with a polarity here or there, but the histories of those people can still be linked. It's just how history plays back. The people groups change, but the events can still be linked. The Democratic National Convention went to a contested convention for Grover Cleveland that year of 1884, and it was talked about right up until the day of the Republican National Convention. It was talked about as a possibility of a contested convention. They also wanted to release the delegates to vote their conscience on the first ballot. That was the same thing they tried to do against Grover Cleveland in 1884. The 1884 general election was the closest presidential election in history. The results are carried on wikipedia.org. The popular vote, Grover Cleveland had 4,914,492 votes. James G. Blaine had 4,856,905 votes. Electoral votes, Cleveland had 219, Blaine had 182. States won, Cleveland had 20, Blaine had 18. In the final week before the election, a political gaffe occurred in New York, hurting Mr. Blaine. The popular vote count in New York was Grover Cleveland 563,154 and James G. Blaine 562,005. Grover Cleveland won his home state of New York by 1,149 votes, took the 36 delegates, and that gave him the election and the presidency. So the question is, can this exact scenario fall exact a second time? It's possible, but the probability is infinitesimally small. That's another reason I took this book in the direction that I did, to try and help people realize the frequency bias they might possess against Mr. Trump. Maybe they will give him a second look, and also to show everyone his real potential as being that of Grover Cleveland. With only a thin margin of error for the rest of this election, everything Mr. Trump does weighs heavily either for or against him, as to show his current this current repeat as to how this current repeat of history manifests itself in the end. I thought this book could help him one way or another in winning the presidency. There were many riots in 1884 with many dead. Do not be on the streets of Cleveland, Ohio during the GOP nomination or any general election debate site if it's between Mr. Trump and Hillary Clinton. These riots from 1884 could easily play back in our time. Let the police handle the problems. And again, I wrote this in the beginning of February, and you've seen the riots in Chicago, the riots in Charlotte, the riots in California. I think there were some in Texas. So, it doesn't necessarily have to be at the conventions or anything else, but you see the same violent time playing back. It was, a lot of Ku Klux Klan and stuff in the 1880s, and now today we have the same thing, only with Black Lives Matter. On to Chapter 14, Making Use of What We Learned, a few examples. We see many places in the Hebrew Scriptures referring to the word of the Creator, either creating all things or holding all things together. The only way that can be is if everything is frequency. In Buddhism, reality is seen as a projection or illusion. The quote by Albert Einstein, "This reality is an illusion, albeit a very persistent one." The modern sciences finally prove all three of these prior statements. The second part of this book shows how these frequencies or programs attract and repel. It shows how to find that specified same advanced holographic program in history, its twin as I call it. This can actually show the possible future of the person we are tracking. It can also show that a period from history has returned. History continually repeats itself. If you wish to continue these studies on your own, I hope I've given enough directions on how to accomplish that. How these programs relate to each other in attracting and repelling can help anyone, anytime, in our daily routines, friendships, relationships, etc. The easiest way to understand how you attract and repel other programs is to practice when you watch a movie or television show. First, to validate this book and what you have been doing since birth with everyone you have encountered, think of all the shows that you loved as a child. Find the actors/actresses' real names, take their birthdays, and change them into that single-digit number, which is the advanced holographic program they are running. Then compare your program to the program of the person you are researching with the chart I provided. The characters you loved the most should virtually always turn up as your twin program or a most compatible or okay to good. Always keep in mind your parents' imprinting on your program, as I explained previously. Their influence can either change a least compatible program to a neutral or good on the chart. They can also change a most compatible program to a neutral or less on the chart. If you have been married for a long time, as an example, my wife and I have been married 31 years, I can feel the presence of that beautiful 3 program, which she is, quicker than any other. I can identify it on television or in a photo. When you curl up in bed with that 3 program every night for 31 years, you know it like no other. I can tell when I'm near a 3 program. I know it sounds crazy, but you'll see if you continue on with this study. A test I gave to my wife as we watched, I believe it was the show Supernatural. There were 3 women on screen in a room talking. I said to my wife, which one of these 3 women are you attracted to the most? I had already found the 2 least compatibles and was pretty sure the last woman was the 3 program. My wife picked out not the youngest or prettiest. She picked the one I knew she was going to. We then found their names and did their birthdays. The 2 I eliminated as least compatibles were least compatibles, and the one I knew she would pick was that most beautiful 3 program, just like my wife, one of her twins. I gave her a test on the show Arrow and asked her what she thought of the lead actor Stephen Amell. I already knew he was one of my twin 5 programs. I knew she would be very attracted to that program. She never did answer me, so the next day I asked her again, and she shyly answers, "Yeah, I find him attractive." So I said, "Why do you think that is?" She replied, "He's a 5, isn't he?" I replied, "I didn't even have to ask you. I knew what you thought about him. I already knew he was one of my twins." The movie Tron, I loved it as a kid, and I recently watched it again for the first time in years, this time to see why I liked the show. I tried to identify each of the main characters. I could tell Jeff Bridges was the most compatible. He played Flynn. He turned out to be a 3 program. That I got right, but usually I can call them by number. It's harder for me when it's a man, though. Dan Shore, who played Ram, I called him as a 3 program and got that exactly right. Cindy Morgan, who played Laura or Yori, I called her as that most beautiful 3 program, and it turned out that was correct also. Bruce Boxleitner, who played Tron, I called him as a 3 or 5 program. He turned out to be a 5 program. Bernard Hughes, who played Dr. Gibbs or Dumont, I called him as a 5 program, and that was right. So, of course, that movie was definitely in my wheelhouse. I know my 3 and 5 programs. Other programs can fool me at times. Since being a man, it's way easier to interface and figure out a woman's program than it is to figure out a man's. My wife, who is still learning a lot but doing well, seems to interface equally well with both genders. I sent her a test of this photo, which I'll show in a moment, as I was scrolling through some first lady pictures. If you are scrolling through some pictures, not fast or slow, just a good moderate speed, and one of the pictures catches your eye and makes you want to stop on it, that means you just found one of your twins or are most compatible to your program. Sometimes an okay to good. You can't be thinking about looking for them. If you do, the brain takes over and you get a wrong answer usually. Just naturally look through the pictures. You will feel a subtle attraction causing you to want to stop and look at that person or go back to take a closer look. That is the clue that your program has interfaced with and locked on to a twin or most compatible program. Here is the photo I sent my wife. This first lady caught my eye while scrolling. I went back and looked at her because the simple fact of me going back means she was a most compatible program. I studied her face, saw some of our daughter's features, and came to the conclusion she was a 7 program. I then looked up her birth date. This is Louisa Adams, wife of John Quincy Adams. She was born 2/12/1775, and she is that 7 program that I figured she was. Like I said, these programs have never changed, never will change. She died in 1852. Here is that photo of Louisa Adams. After I got it correct, I sent the photo to my wife and asked her to interface and study this picture and to let me know what program she is running. My wife texts back, "You know I can't do this like you, but I would have to guess a 7 program." Then I texted her that the photo was of Louisa Adams. It is actually a picture of a painting. This woman was born in 1775 and died in 1852. I said to her, "And don't ever say you can't do it. You just interfaced with a text of a painting of a woman that died in 1852. She is that 7 program that you thought. The most compatible programs to yours will be the easiest to tell. It just takes a fraction of a second to interface. The information from the quantum level is passed to your brain and it becomes a thought. The least compatible are the next easiest. You'll feel a slight aversion to or repelling from these programs/people. Such as the movie Jurassic Park. I like the concept and the action and adventure, but I caught myself doing research on my phone. The characters just didn't attract me. I looked up all the characters and figured out all their programs, and every one of them was from a neutral to a least compatible program of mine. You're now very near the end of this book and have enough information to be an advanced holographic program independent analyst. That's the name I gave this field in the job description. It will look great on the resume. I wonder if they will give us a strange look or be too afraid to ask for an explanation of it. Have fun with it, whatever you do. My wife and I certainly do. I hope someone understands the reality better. Most of all, pay no attention to those who keep saying that those who vote for Donald Trump are less educated. If the people that make these comments would simply figure out their own program, between 85 and 93% are least compatible with Mr. Trump. They are letting their own frequency bias interfere with their ability to hear his message and to see that once great president, Grover Cleveland, in him. The next book, well, it's going to be videos, like I said, is one which I've started 5 times in the last 5 years and just threw out each time. I figured virtually no one will get it because of establishment programming. I didn't realize how many people still want to hear it like it is, so like Mr. Trump says, swing for the fences. And that's exactly what I intend to do. We'll look at that beautiful woman, that enigma wrapped in a paradox, in the next book of videos. We will see what love at first sight is. It's an epic love story that transverses dimensions. Most importantly, we will end the ancient's quest that everyone seems to have given up on, identifying the one who sees, that user or spirit that's trapped inside our program, the one that this holographic imaging field was designed for. It will be an unbelievable journey that we will go on. If this book was too much for your programming, the next one or videos you might want to pass on. I remember staring into a black star field one night as an 8-year-old and thinking, why is that all up there and I'm stuck down here? At the age of 11, I remember the teacher at school asking everyone what they wanted to be when they grew up. The usual answers were policeman, nurse, etc. I told her, I don't know. Actually, I was thinking, I want to know why I'm here, who I really am, and then when I find out, I want to tell the rest of them because they're the same as I am. It took until I was 42 years old. Now I'm 51, and I've studied for over 25 years now every field that connects and interrelates to our reality here. The past 10 years alone have been 25 to 50 hours a week, 6 days a week. It all came down to wanting to know the truth in all things and asking for it. The sciences have many answers but won't budge from their dogmas. The religions have many answers but won't budge from their dogmas. So I had to study it all, and when finished, it left a crystal clear picture of what is going on here. I can't imagine, or I can't change your programming and won't try to. Only you can do that. All that I can do is to give you what I've learned over so many decades and hope someone builds on it. The next book probably won't be out, well, videos, until maybe December. That way we can see how this incredible election plays out from history and comment on it. As we end this book, I've recently read 2 more articles, one in the Washington Post and another in the New York Post. Both had to do with Donald Trump, and in both articles there were different advertisements for the Cleveland Orchestra. Nothing at all in this article talked about Grover Cleveland. Nothing at all in this article talked about Grover Cleveland. I read another article on how Mr. Trump can still make the 1,237 delegates. At 2 different places in this article, they had a book for sale. The book was entitled The Last Jeffersonian, Grover Cleveland and the Path to Restoring the Republic. A big picture of Grover Cleveland was on the front. They made no connections whatsoever in that article about anything between 1884 and now, or Donald Trump and Grover Cleveland. While you are reading anything, take in what is going on around it. There are always messages right in front of your face, and we don't see them. It's obvious to me this whole event is screaming to have recognition, and especially the connection of Grover Cleveland and Donald Trump. I have a good idea why, but we'll see if history changes once it is made public. The Don holds the trump card in this historical replay from a long-lost era. He could buy any one of the many island chains for sale in the world and start his own country. He could make a good deal. That's how he could change history, if it's all taken from him at the nomination or if he loses a general election. Donald Trump, father of a new nation. Has an interesting ring to it. Most people would say, he can't do that, that's crazy. But then again, who would have thought Grover Cleveland would walk out from the pages of history along with his beautiful wife, Frances Folsom? Thank you for reading this book. I would rather have met face-to-face. I do a crazy good show and tell and enjoy meeting other messengers. Be careful out there. Remember, all possibilities are in position. Good night, my friends.